Everybody, welcome back to the show. Now, our guest today needs very little introduction, but I'm going to give a little bit of introduction so you know my relation to today's guest. So today's guest is Dr. Maurice Ferré. Many of you know him as a serial entrepreneur in the space. He's also the CEO and founder of Insightech, a really exciting company. But all of us know Dr. Ferré from his work at Mako Surgical, which essentially was acquired today. So we're recording this on December 17th. 11 years ago, on this exact day, Stryker acquired Mako for $1.7 billion. And for me, the story of how I know Dr. Ferré, which from now on I'll start calling you Maurice because we've become friends since getting connected, is I came out of medical school and I started working at Mazor Robotics, great robotic spine company. And at the time, I said, hey, let me start buying some stocks, because that's how I heard everybody made money. It's like, I invested in this one company. So I found out about Mako and I did some research and I'm like, man, I think this is how all knee replacements are going to be done robotically. It just makes so much sense, etc. And I remember the week that I made this decision, I was like, I'm getting paid this week. As soon as I get my paycheck, I'm buying some Mako stock. And then lo and behold, I wake up one day and the stock spiked and I called my friend like, hey, what happened with Mako? Like the stock went up and they're like, oh, it got acquired by Stryker. And so unfortunately I missed that boat, but fast forward 11 years later, I finally get to meet you, Maurice. It's such an honor and a pleasure to meet you. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks, Omar, for having me on your podcast. It's and congratulations on the tremendous success that you've had of kind of being the first kind of guy out there in the medtech space to really make social media and podcasts work. And you have so many great guests. And, as I was kind of talking to one of my friends yesterday, Michael Stansky, he was just telling me that yesterday he was listening to your podcast on stroke. So you have a lot of really good things out there that really pay attention to the medical device space.
Thank you so much. Before we get into the history of like how did Mako come about and everything, I kind of want to hear, I want my audience to learn a little bit more about your personal history. Like, where did you grow up? How did you decide to go into medicine? And probably the other side is, how did you get into the industry? So maybe you could spend a couple minutes telling us your story.
Everybody, quick break. If you're a medtech CEO or a product leader, you're going to want to listen to this sound. I want you to imagine you're about to have a product launch. You've poured your time, your budget, your reputation into a device you're about to launch. And after all of that effort, your FDA submission, boof, gets rejected because of cybersecurity. This sounds dramatic, but it's actually not. It happens all the time to medtech companies, especially, recently with everything being digitized. This happens so often because medtech companies treat cybersecurity as a checkbox when it's now a non-negotiable design pillar. The FDA's 2023 guidance didn't suggest cybersecurity, it demanded it. So if you're not ready with threat modeling, penetration testing, SBOM management, incident response, and airtight documentation, you're not launching, period. And here's what most entrepreneurs don't realize. Scrambling to fix these issues last minute can cost over $250,000 and delay your launch by months, which imagine the investment of getting delayed, right? The more you spend time in review limbo with the FDA is lost revenue, lost market share, and lost investor confidence. And yet, so many founders and entrepreneurs I talk to, they still treat cybersecurity as a postscript instead of a strategic advantage. Now, I've held off bringing this to my audience as a topic until now because there just wasn't a medtech-focused cybersecurity firm that I trusted, and that changed when I found Blue Goat Cyber. They specialize exclusively in medtech cybersecurity. They've helped companies like bioMaru, Inogen, Natera, along with nimble startups to get to market faster with a 100% FDA success rate. I had the chance to meet the founder, Christian Espinosa, and his story really resonated with me. So after he sold his first cybersecurity company, Alpine Security, Christian actually faced a personal health crisis. He ended up in the hospital, and that moment made him realize how vital and vulnerable medical devices really are because a medical device saved his life. So he built Blue Goat to serve medtech CEOs and founders just like you. Whether you're pre-revenue or scaling fast, Blue Goat can offer fixed-free pricing, unlimited retests, and no surprises. This isn't bolt-on security. This is built in from day one. You wouldn't launch a device that hasn't been clinically validated, so why would you risk launching one that's vulnerable to attack?
Blue Goat will secure your device, simplify your submission, accelerate your approval, and they'll do it in a way that fits your budget, your timeline, and your team. So here's what I want you to do next. Go to bluegoatcyber.com, schedule a discovery call. They do these amazing calls. They'll do an analysis with you, educate you more, because the cost of waiting could be everything that you've worked for. So that being said, go to bluegoatcyber.com and schedule that call now. Let's get back to the episode.
Omar, that's, I guess similar to you, I'm a little older, but there was a period, as I had the dean of medical affairs the dean of students at Boston University. I went to school at Boston University, and I was so determined to become a doctor because I had this incredible great aunt who was a nun, and she was in Puerto Rico, and she won the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and she also won the Albert Schweitzer Humanitarian Award. But more importantly, what she really did is she impacted hundreds of thousands of people with her work on vocation of giving kids from Puerto Rico, kids that came from New York and Chicago, and she gave them purpose, and she did it through vocation. And I remember going down there as a kid to Puerto Rico and watching this, and I said, man, this is like what we need to do. We need to do good. We have to figure out how to do good. And for me, that translated into becoming a doctor. As a doctor, I went in, and lo and behold, I'm in medical school, and everybody in medical school, it's like, I'm going to become a surgeon. I'm going to become this. I'm going to become that. And I used to hang out with a bunch of people from MIT, and I used to hang out with people there was a guy that I hung out with that happened to live downstairs from a house that we were living in, named Danny Hillis. And Danny was the founder of a company called Thinking Machines. And Thinking Machines built a massively parallel supercomputer that had 64,000 processors. And I was a second-year medical student, kind of like going through the grind. And, at that time, you know how it is, Omar, with medical school. It's like you're just the years
For a few years.
Yeah, it's just hardcore. And I was just like going through the grind. And I run into Danny, who happened to live downstairs in a second house, a two-family house in Brookline. And Danny kind of said, I'm making these computers, and I said, what do you use it for? And he goes, I'm using it primarily for military purposes. And I said, well, what are you doing in medical? And he said, well, I don't know, not a lot. Why don't you come over? So I spent an afternoon during the summer between second and third year, and I was blown away with this computer and the capabilities. And I said, I'm wondering if we can map out the brain and use voxels. And at the time, everybody was looking at two-dimensional concepts, and I kind of got into it. Short story, to make the story short, what happened was I all of a sudden realized that there was tremendous potential with this technology for mapping out the brain. I went to a radiologist in Miami named Dr. Villamonte, and Dr. Villamonte said, I know these radiologists up in Boston at Mass General and at the Brigham. And I presented it to Dr. Tobias and to Dr. Yoles and Dr. Holman at the Brigham. And they basically got really excited about the work that they could do to map out the brain. And I started then meeting the people at the surgical planning lab. I started meeting people at the media lab at MIT. And what started as a curiosity, ended up where I took 2 years off of medical school to run this project. And I realized that I had to go back to medical school. In the process, all I knew was like, okay, I got this going. I got to get some engineers to do some coding. It's going to cost money. How do I get money? Oh, you got to write a business plan. So what's a business plan? I had no idea what a business plan was. So I went to Boston University, the School of Business Questrom, and I took a class in entrepreneurship. And there I said, hey, I need someone to help me write a business plan. So the class wrote the business plan, and it was like, I got really into it. And I got so much into it that I was really going to drop out of medical school. But then I realized, hey, I got to finish this. I got to finish medical school. I got to do this. And I went into deciding. I decided that if I ever have kids, I want to tell my kids that they have to finish what they start. So I went back into medical school. But the cool thing is I got $6 million donation to allow the Brigham to basically get the connection machine. And it was the groundworks for a lot of the R01s and the image processing in the lab that was Frank Yolis and Ron Kikinis. And they became my mentors throughout the years, with the work that we started. Then Sun Microsystems started doing their work. A lot of the work of what we're seeing today, augmented reality, navigation, surgical planning, the OR, the future, the work that Rick Satava did in terms of defining with the Department of Defense what the OR, the future looks like, all came from that work. A lot of stuff came out of there. But I went back to medical school and started that whole process, and that was important for me to get back to. But then getting back to my dean at the medical school at Boston University, he said, son, graduation, he came up to my dad and said, how does it feel, your son giving up a residency and not becoming a real doctor? How does it feel, Mr. Ferré? Because he's the first one in our class. And he said, medicine is a vocation. And, and fast forward, like 20 years later, I became the chairman. I became a board member at Boston University and the chairman of the health affairs in the medical school. So, it's funny because I feel like you kind of got to go down. For me, it hit differently, right? It was at that moment, at that time when I made that decision, I second guessed is like, am I really giving up a residency to do a fellowship as an entrepreneur? Like that hasn't been done, right? Nowadays, all my friends in medical school, they all come back to me and they say, hey, it's like, how did you know? How did you figure this out to kind of like link these two things together? And it was, so once again, it goes back to the passion of wanting to do something to help people and then figuring out that there's other ways to help people other than becoming a doctor. And that really was the talent that came from my family in terms of business and understanding how to build companies. And I kind of combined the two, and it was really, really novel. So it was really cool at the time. Now it's like more and more people do it.
Yeah. What's interesting though is that I can relate in my own way because, I guess these days it's very common for people to essentially go to medical school and not to practice medicine. Either they're going to be an entrepreneur or they're going to go work for a management consulting company or, something, Goldman Sachs or something. But back even 5-10 years ago, it was like kind of unheard of and really bad. I don't know if you experienced it yourself, but the first couple years I left medical school, people looked at me like I was crazy, like I was kind of like a leper. Did you go through that where people, you're now a doctor, like really practicing stuff, and then you have to explain to them that you're not. What was that first year like for you?
Oh, it was hard. It was hard. People, friends of mine were there, they just said, this is not the way it's done. But, I'll tell you another cool story and I'll make it short. But yeah, I had when I was in college, I became friends with this guy named Michael Reardon. And Michael Reardon was at Hopkins and he was in the medical school and he was taking classes in foreign policy at the School of International Studies, SICE. And his father was a career diplomat stationed in Japan. So he was an extremely eclectic, really cool guy. And I said, Michael, what are you doing? He's like, well, I want to know a little more about the world and the history. And then he said to me, and then he did something really crazy. He went right to Harvard Business School. Like very rarely somebody from medical school would go to Harvard Business School. So he goes to Harvard Business School, and I, in Boston, was friends with him and hang out with him, and then he said, I'm going to go work for a venture capital group in California, called Menlo Ventures. And I said, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. He goes, yeah, then I'm going to start a company. I have this company that I'm working on with RNA, and it was Gilead. And here's a guy. Then all of a sudden, Michael was like, he ran it, and then next thing, Donald Rumsfeld's on his board. So as I'm kind of going down my journey, I always think of like what Michael did, and in doing something remarkable. And so there was always a step there. Another role model for me has always been Fred Moll, because Fred also is one of these guys that just like figured out ways of how to use his medical degree to do something that he's passionate about. And there's a consistency with people that I think are in this, that become doctors. And for me, it was important because I used my medical degree early on to open doors, to be able to kind of like think of and always have that clinical edge of like, you're developing. And I love technology, but you got to have that angle. It's like, what is it? It's not just the technology for technology's sake. It's like, you have to figure out what the clinical use of this stuff is. So those were like good mentors during the early years of trying to kind of figure out, how to do something other than become a doctor.
Yeah, and something, before we jump into the early beginnings of Mako, one thing I want to express, like not just on behalf of myself, but I think I can speak for the entire medtech community, is that, no offense to other countries, but something about American entrepreneurship that's very inspiring is that if we look at somebody like Fred Moll, somebody like yourself, I'll just use the two of you as examples. Both of you could have just kind of hung it up to dry and sort of rested on your laurels after your first venture, and you would have been good. But here you are, you've done multiple companies, and you continue to push it because rather than sort of, just take your earnings and just kind of relax, you're constantly finding new ways to take on more challenges. And of course, with that, more stress, more pressure, all in the pursuit of better patient outcomes and changing lives. You're doing that now at InsightTech, which, I told you offline that, I see a lot of cool technologies, but InsightTech is one of the technologies where I literally feel like I'm seeing magic being done because it's in this neurosurgery. And we'll get to that later in the episode, but start tracking. But we're grateful for people like you, and and what I'm happy about is that, having people like you in our industry sets a standard for generations to come that, hey, like after your first big exit, like you're not done yet. You're just getting started. So I'm really grateful for that. So let's start in the Mako days. So, we have a mutual friend, Chris Dewey.
Yeah.
What was going on? Mako wasn't Mako. Mako was a company called ZCat. So what was ZCat, and what did it do, and how did you essentially get in?
There was a good friend of mine named Joe Pepper, and Joe Pepper was running GE OEC at the time, and he introduced me to Chris and John Whitman. So I went to New York. I had just sold my first company, which was Visualization Technology. It was the spin out of the company that I started in medical school, and then where I explained the whole thing about the AI. We basically did navigations. We
Are you able to share who you sold to?
GE.
Oh, to GE. Okay, got it.
GE, and then I became a GE for like 6 months.
And then you lost your mind because you didn't want to be an employee.
What happened was they gave me a really cool job. They basically, it was an amazing story how this company got sold, but it really goes back to, knowing the timing and people. But it was a technology that I took out of MIT, similar to what we did with Mako. It was a GPS navigation system, electromagnetic, and we attached it to instruments, and we went after the ENT market, and we sold over 1,000 systems, and now it's standard of care. There's millions and millions of procedures that have been performed using image-guided surgery navigation. Everyone was focused on the brain. I started in ENT, really got the thought leaders behind it. It was a 10-year run. And I went to go work, then GE bought the company. And when I went to GE, my job was to give them work for business development. And I was basically traveling the world looking at different companies. I got on the board of a robotics company at Johns Hopkins that was run by Russ Taylor. And then all of a sudden I got a call from my good friend, Joe Pepper. And Joe Pepper was the grandson of Congressman, or what they called Senator Claude Pepper, who was really kind of the biggest advocate for Social Security. And he was one of our congressmen here in the state of Florida. So Joe was a good friend. He called me up and says, hey, there's this group that they've got this company. They're having trouble with it. They're looking for someone to run it. And I went to go meet Chris. And when I met Chris, we hit it off right from day one. It was like, it's like you meet people and you say, I can hang with this guy. This is like that type of person I want to be with, and we immediately connected, and he said, look, just come down. And I was about to run a new company, in Baltimore. I was going to move to Baltimore, run this company for robotics company for steerable work in needles inside MRs. And I basically met Fred through that process. And I said to Fred, Fred, look, I'm looking at this, and, there's this really cool company that, has called ZCat, and they've got this robot. And I've known Roni, and I knew him for years. Roni was like competing in my space. He was just like too late to the game.
And around what year was this roughly?
2003.
2003. Got it.
2003. So, I sold my company in 2003. So, I basically, I started my first company in 93. I sold in 2003. 2003, I meet Chris and Roni, and I say, look, let me just, I happened to be down in Miami, and I was married to my wonderful wife, Maria Dolores, and I had 4 kids. And, I told them a long time ago that I would eventually move to Miami. It just took me a little while. So finally, my kids were the perfect age. But I told Chris, I said, Chris, let me go down there and see what this is like. And when I looked at ZCat, it was like, there was just a lot of crazy stuff happening. It's just like it was a lot of science projects. Roddy had developed the Z box, and it was like this whole idea of this portable, navigation system that he had worked with Biomed on that project, and he was working on a neuromodulation program, and he was working on a robotics program. He's just like it was like a gut work of like really cool stuff. But and Chris was crazy enough to invest in all these things, but it was a big science project. It was big. It was like Xerox PARC. It was IBM Xerox PARC. And
let me show you. I think this is the correct one, but I have a very old photo of an ugly baby that I didn't share with you. I think this is one of the original ZCat robots. Is this?
Yeah. So that's very cool, because that was one of the robots, which is called the whole arm manipulator. So there was a company called Barrett out of MIT. And what was amazing about that technology is that it was cable driven, and it was more designed by what is the Da Vinci, the robotic man that was were drawings were all cable driven. And what was really amazing, when I saw that robot, one of the things that wowed me was there's these incredible videos of it hitting baseballs and catching and being as light as a feather. You could touch the tip of it. It was as light as a feather, or it can become rigid. And it was really the first really haptics robot that was this robotic arm that was just absolutely amazing. So that was one of the things that was on the portfolio of just amazing things that was at ZCat. So, one of the things that happened was, I kind of like said, okay, this is really cool. I can get into this, but the problem is, you have no money. It's like, we got to go raise money. So that was like, oh my gosh, how are we going to go raise money? And then Chris said, well, I got some ideas. So let's go do it. So after 6 months of consulting, I decided to take the leap. And in 2014, I jumped in.
What specifically happened? Like, what was the feeling or emotion that you felt? What was the intuition?
well, to me, it's in hindsight, it's probably easy to kind of like figure out like what worked and what didn't work. But really, what really triggered for me was the robot. I mean, that was the thing. And that was always in the backdrop. But there were so many other things that were in front of it that we had to deal with. Like we had to deal with the relationship with biomed, and we had to deal with like not having cash, and and this was far from front and center. It was not, there was a vision there, but it was just like that wasn't what was the key thing. There was too many things going on. So first thing we had to do was we had to figure out what the heck are we going to do here? And what we did very quickly was we jumped into trying to raise money. So I one of the guys that I met in the process was a doctor that had been working with these guys named John Rapisi. And John was really important for me in my thinking and kind of steering the conversation, because John was a dentist and he was up in upstate New York, and he had been the key guy that was developing partial knee replacement, but he was doing it with a drill and not with a saw. And that became really interesting, because for me, it's like his whole comment was, I would train people on how to do this with a drill, and they just can't get it. They don't understand how to do a freehand. And the analogy for me was when someone is like doing work with ice, and like you can do a beautiful sculpture. Like if you ask me to do a beautiful sculpture in ice, I gotta know what to do. But there are people that know how to do it. So people have this three-dimensional perception of like where things are in space. And I think that John Rapisi has that. He had the talent to do it, but he couldn't figure out how to train people how to use this burr, to be able to resurface a bone. And when we started working on the sawbones and showing him how to create these borders and haptics, and every knee would be perfect in terms of the burring, he lit up. He said, "This is magic. This is exactly what is the key thing." And that's where the word Mako came from. Because it was minimal access, keyhole orthopedics.
Oh, so it wasn't, I mean, I guess coincidentally, because I always thought because you're in Miami, you have Mako Sharks. I was like, so Mako is actually an acronym.
Well, that's very interesting, because, if I go back and, that was, we were sitting, there was a few of us. There was Fritz Laporte, Menashe Frank, and Roni Abovitz and myself, and we were just sitting in our office in Sheridan, and we were trying to figure out like what the heck are we going to call this. And I said, look, I really think we need an acronym so that if we go public, it's like 4 letters, MAKO, right? Something, right? And Fritz was a fisherman. And then I started getting into minimal access, and kind of coming up keyhole orthopedics, because it was all about, to me, the robot. It was about John Rapisi, and eventually Martin Roche, because, that Martin eventually becomes the guy that really brings the magic together. But, we kind of went through this whole thing with trying to figure out, and then Fritz, kind of being the fisherman, came up with, the shark, Mako. And then we started doing some research on Mako, the shark, and it lives in tropical waters. It's the fastest of the sharks. It attacks its prey from underneath, and it doesn't see the threat. It's an aggressive hunter, and unlike other sharks, Mako relies primarily on his vision for hunting. And it has the fewest attacks on humans. So it was like, as the smartest of the sharks, I said, yeah, okay, we'll be a Mako. So
Nice. So that was ZCat became Mako essentially.
Yeah, that's how this became Mako. And
now, did it originally? What was the original focus of Mako? Did you guys start by saying we're going to look at knee replacements, or was it?
Well, what I'm saying is when ZCat was all over the place, right? And then we needed money, right? So then I meet John Rapisi, and John Rapisi to me was kind of the ironclad concept. And that's where we put our business plan together. So we gotta just like focus on this. And then what we did was we had to go, I had to go, we had to figure out what to do with Biomet and, with Dana Miller and Niles Noblet. And it was really, they were really interested in the robot then, and they wanted it, right? But they had invested all this money in this venture, to get navigation. And so Chris and I think Fritzy went up with us. And we went to Warsaw, and we basically sat down in a conference room and like overnight structured a deal with them. I mean, literally we sat down, and I'll remember a story that, Dana Miller was an amazing guy. He's a giant in the orthopedic space, and, God bless him for what he did. I think that, Biomet is an incredible company, what they did at Biomet in the early days. But, we were looking out the window and there was a guy in a motorcycle without a helmet, and, and he said, well, that's going to be one of our patients. That's a future customer of ours. It's like anybody on a motorcycle. But he was an amazing guy. And literally what we did is we, in less than an hour in a conference room, sat down and we basically said, look, this is a disaster. We have no more money. We can't afford this. You want this navigation system, you're going to have to give us more money. And they said, no, we're not going to give you any more money. I said, well, okay, then what you need to do is you need to take over this part of the business. And literally right there, right on the spot, we cut a deal. And next day I go down to ZCat, and I call a meeting with all the employees. And I basically kind of like literally I said, we just did a deal. And I named all the people. I said, I want you to go to the left side, and then on the right side, I split up the people, and I said, congratulations, you guys on the left, you're now part of Biomet. Congratulations, you guys on the right, we're starting this company. We came up with a shark, and it's called Mako, and you're with us. And we were literally, I split it up, and that then all of a sudden gave us focus. Then I had to go off and raise money. It's like, okay, now we took away the liabilities, and Menashe worked really hard in helping us to figure out that we just ended up with the assets. And then there was another very important development that took place, was that, Alistair Clemo and he had a company that had with IP around resurfacing implants. And what I immediately thought was the critical part of the business idea was to have not just a robot that had haptics, but also have the implant, because I always thought the implant was a commodity. And the model that I presented was that this was going to be a closed loop system, that we were going to develop, and we were going to start not with a total knee, but with a partial knee, with Rapisi's concept of using a burr. And that was the business model that I started pitching. And, there were 20,000 of these procedures done annually, but there was very little momentum. Biomet had the leadership role on partial knees, and it made a lot of sense. It's like, why do you need to have this big implant when you could preserve all your tissue? And he goes, and we have the perfect way of training people. It's a robot. And that was 2014. And then we went off, to try to raise money. And, Chris is just a genius in finding people in the early days. And we were able to bring in crazy, story of David Tepper. It was one of his friends in the Goldman Sachs days. And David became one of our investors. And it was like crazy. And then I had to go off to, I went out to California and tried to raise money, and like nobody was buying. It's like, there's no way. It's like, you're Florida, no one's going to give you money. But I was able to finally find the right type of people, Series A, and we were off in the races and getting started.
I gotta ask. So for the audience, one is when you mentioned Biomet, this is the Biomet that Zimmer essentially acquired for 13 billion, and now they became Zimmer Biomet. So my first question to you is like, when you're in the room, the room where it happens, where you made that deal, right? Because that essentially not only determined that Mako is going to become a thing, but it also in some ways put Biomet in a position to be successful. Why do you think they made a deal when they originally said, we're not going to give you guys any more money?
They really wanted the robot. They really, really wanted it. And we said no. We held the ground. I remember overnight, it's like, should we do this? We said, no, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. And we basically were going to walk away and say, look, we're just going to shut down everything. We'll let all these people go. It's like your project that you wanted on navigation. Because look, remember at the time when this was done in 2003, what was really in the industry was navigation. Navigation was the future, not robotics. I mean, there was Robodoc was out there, but that was way out there, right? There were a couple of people working on it, but but navigation, and there's a herd mentality.
And I was going to say for the audience to keep in mind, because I know some people are thinking intuitive during those years wasn't doing that great either.
Nothing.
Yeah. So robotics was kind of like a shiny object, like, oh, that's cool, but the navigation was the thing. And I would say that navigation continued being a thing like well into like 2010, 2011. We even struggled competing against it at Mazor.
Yeah, exactly. So, so what they thought was like, hey, we need a navigation solution. And we love the work that ZCat's done in navigation. We'll just take it. So they that was bird in the hand. That's what the market wants. The future stuff's not going to fly out. So we ended up with the golden gem. We ended up with what was the most important thing, and we locked out. And then the other thing that I did to raise money, this was crazy. We had some patents, and there was a company called Image Guided Neurologics, IGN. And a guy named Rudy Mazaki that was running that company, and he needed our IP because he was trying to get acquired by Medtronic. So we sold this IP for $1 million. So it was like I sold the IP, got the Biomet deal done, raised some money with David Tepper and company, and bang, we're off to the races.
And was that a key for you guys? Because one thing I didn't notice is that Mako was pretty talented at generating patents. Like you guys had over 300. Was that a key strike?
Well, it was. I'll tell you, I give a lot of credit to Roni and his thinking about patents, but because there was a lot of acquisitions, we bought all of the Picker Marconi patents. So early on, this was in the ZCat, so we transferred that, and then we went over to IBM because IBM was the first company that was really working on Robodoc, and we basically cut a deal to get all their. It was 10,000 patents in the whole field of anything with that they had. We did a cross license with them, and it was just like this crazy deal that we did with IBM as well. So we really kind of like painted the landscape. We would spend a lot of time and energy, and these companies that are starting up. It's so important to create this IP wealth, and so we did a lot of that. There's a lot of IP. Generated in that period of time.
I want to pivot for a second. I want to pull something up to kind of generate my sort of next area. But you shared a meme with me. So for the audience who's not watching, this is a meme of Albert Einstein writing on chalkboard, and it says, "I predict that robotics will play a major role in healthcare and especially in the field of orthopedics for resurfacing of arthritic bone." Can you tell me more about this picture and that quote?
Yeah, I mean, this was our mission statement. This is how, when Mako was, the whole step functions of having a robot that can solve Rapisi's problem and being able to find a way to create articulating surfaces. And when we worked with Alistair and developing what was we had on design a tri-compartmental knee, resurfacing knee. So the whole concept was, of preserving tissue, preserving soft tissue. And a lot of it, came with a lot of conversations with Martin Roche, him and Martin kind of being in the forefront, it was incredible because here we are in Fort Lauderdale, and over at Holy Cross, just right down the street, Martin had done surgery on Fritz, and we had a relationship with him, and he brought him into the office, and the guys were kind of in the direction of trying to use the robot for spine, and Martin was saying, no, you got to do it in the knee, you got to do it this, and connecting the dots. And Martin,
why is that, by the way? Because some might say, especially at the time you guys did this. So again, you guys founded the company, I think roughly, like Mako became its own company around like 2006, and you guys went public in 2008, not the best year to go public. But in that period, like, why do you feel like it was a niche market, and why was it such a niche market? Because you could have gone to other things that,
All right, everyone, quick commercial break. If you're a MedTech CEO/founder, or maybe you're a sales or marketing leader at a startup or a scale-up, you're going to want to listen to this. Are you struggling to get in front of your ideal audience, whether that's investors or perhaps clinicians who want to adopt your product? Maybe you're getting ghosted. You send emails and messages and nothing comes back, nothing happens, right? Or worse, nobody knows who you are, right? In business, visibility is everything. And I always tell people, if you want to persuade before persuasion can happen, you have to learn how to get attention. So if your sales team is desperate for traction, clinicians don't know your name, investors have never heard of you, you're losing opportunities every day. And that needs to change now, not tomorrow, not next week, now. That's where my company Khateeb & Co. comes in. We don't just do marketing, we do growth. We figure out how to engineer markets by creating magnetic messaging that makes you impossible to ignore. And we build high impact strategies, of course using social media, but other channels such as email, text, and others to help turn content and messaging into commercial pipeline, and it leads into closed deals. As an example, we worked with a surgical robotics company in raising a $31 million Series A, and then they needed help on their pre-market release. So we packed their CRM with 198 surgeon leads and nurtured them down. That ended up becoming 4 closed hospitals. 4 hospitals closed and adopted this technology within a period of 6 months, and they got 2 great key opinion leaders in the process. So whether you're a startup founder wearing too many hats, or maybe you have a marketing team that's just spread too thin and they don't have the expertise, my team and I plug in and partner up with your company, and we amplify your reach. From crafting powerful sales scripts to optimizing your team's demo calls, creating content, having it go out on a consistent basis, we transform your outreach into a growth engine. So if you're ready to dominate your market, you're ready to become a known name and people to know of you and take your calls and take your meetings, I want you to act right now. Don't wait anymore, because you've already wasted it plenty of time. Go to growmymedtech.com. That's growmymedtech.com. And I want you to schedule a quick call. My team and I will give you a free analysis with 2 to 3 actionable ideas. There's no strings attached. And if we're a fit, great. We can get partnered up and we can help you go to the next level. And if not, look, the ideas are always free. So do not wait and don't waste any more time. Go to growmymedtech.com right now, and let's make you the go-to name in your niche. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah. No, we were founded in November of 2004. Right. I remember that when we had done that trip to Biomed to close that out, that we finally got that going. So, 2003, I kind of come in as a consultant. 2004, I'm in the game. In 2005, we're raising money. In 2006, we take the robot, and getting back to that picture of what the old robot used to look like, right? The TGS. It's like all the engineers, they wanted a brand new robot, and I said, no, we're taking this robot as is, called the Tactile Guidance System, TGS, and we're going to go to the FDA. And we figured out, a way. William Tapia, who is the T of ZCat, was a regulatory genius, and he figured out a way of identifying a predicate device, which was part of a neuronavigation device, and correlating a stereotactic frame. And he was able to we were able to convince the FDA that this was the predicate device. And we got an approval for a device that we weren't even ready to bring into the operating room. It took us another 2 years. So we got FDA approval and we couldn't bring the robot in for at least 2 years. And then by the time we went public in 2008, I mean, we had done maybe 10 procedures. We had no revenue. And it was
I didn't ask you. So going back, you mentioned that when you guys were going to go to the FDA, the engineers wanted a new robot and you said no.
right.
Why did the engineers want a new robot and why did you decide?
Because engineers, because the team always, they always want something, great, right? They want, because it would have delayed us. I mean, the answer for me was, this works good enough. We can iterate on this later. And that's what we did. We iterated, we put another generation quickly behind it and really built it. But it was functional. It didn't look pretty, but it was really functional. And that to me was more. So engineers always want to perfect things.
They always want something. Well, and by the time you guys went public, and I have the photo of you guys going public, I mean, you guys had a much nicer looking system. Just in comparison for the audience. So like, if we look here, like on the left, that was the left robot. That was what you guys submitted to the FDA, correct? Okay, and the right, definitely much.
And that was, by the way, when we started Mako, in 2004, there were 12 of us, and we had 8 engineers, kind of starting the game, and and then we had come up with the business model, and the business model, was to sell the robot for $1 million, and I said it, and to me, it was kind of a closed loop system. It's like I had gone through the experience of selling in my first company a disposable for $300, and I said, I'm never going to do that again. I want to be something that I can sell for $5,000, and that's why I said I want to own this implant. So we found the implant, and then the other thing is, once we came up with the name, I was so enamored with Kyphon and kyphoplasty. I said we need to brand this as a new type of procedure. So partial knee replacement should be called Makoplasty. So we got the branding right.
Great success, by the way. It was, I think, that was the largest spine deal ever done in history. It was about $6.6 billion and change, I think. Tony Recupero and team really did a great job. Talk to me a little bit, like, what was it like the day that you guys went public, and like, talk to us about people in this photo. Like, so I recognize, like, here's Chris, which is great. Who else is in this photo? And like, what was that like, that first day and month and, year of you guys going public? Because again, it was 08 when you guys went public.
It was on Valentine's Day on February 14th, 2008. And it was a crazy ride. We at the time of the IPO, we had an install base of 5 Mako systems. We had only performed 180 procedures. So we had nowadays there's no way that you would be able to kind of tell the story. And everything was pre-revenue. We had because we were on the TGS, we said we were going to build that other robot. We had to basically hold on everything. So imagine just, 180 procedures done and you're a public company. And none of us had experience as I had no experience as a CEO of a public traded company, but with some of the sharpest people, in the industry, like Michael Stansky, who came in, who was really one of the first guys to really kind of do crossover. Because when he came into our round, I think it was a Series C financing right before the IPO, he was, or maybe it was B or C, but when Michael came in, Michael basically, he was working with Paul Tudor Jones, and they had a fund. He was a MedTech fund, and he basically was kind of the first guy to develop this concept of, like, right before you go public. And then we immediately, went public, with after that round. So it was like one of the first crossover funds that was created. And he was just an amazing, he's an amazing guy. And he was really critical in giving us the conviction. He brought, one of the most amazing things was that through Michael, I get to meet Ken Langone, and Ken became a real believer early on. And, Ken would always open his doors and let me talk to him about, how to build the company. And he was always very thoughtful throughout the process, was strong supporter, he was actually pretty upset when we sold the company. He thinks that we sold way too early. But he was an amazing guy. Ken is a great guy.
And it's interesting you say that, because at the time, so when Stryker acquired Mako, it was about $1.7 billion. And there's a lot of criticism from Wall Street and MedTech, et cetera, that the deal was overvalued. It was way, way overpriced. But fast forward around 2019, 2020, Stryker came out publicly and said that they felt that that investment way more than paid off, because at least to date, and again, I don't know how accurate these figures are. From what my research showed, about like 50 to 60% of all Stryker knees are done with the Mako, and allegedly 40% of all knee replacements in the United States were done using a Mako robot. So technically, if you look at like value creation, like that was a hell of a deal for Stryker.
Yeah, I give a lot of credit to Kevin Lobo, and and to his, just a class act. And Kevin approached me. It wasn't a BD guy; it was Kevin, and he said he wanted to come down and meet me, and we were one-on-one, and we had a dinner, and he wanted to. It was in September. It was on a September. I remember I was out on my boat, and I get a call from Kevin, and I had known him because I was on the board of AvaMed at the time, and when he wanted to talk, he said, "Look, we're going to figure out. I'd love to figure out how we can work together and do stuff." And and then it was at the end of I went to a very quiet place, and we sat down for about 3 or 4 hours and spoke. And he told me his story that when he was in J&J, and he just had a very difficult time because he wanted to buy Intuitive, and J&J never let him do it when he was running Ethicon. And he said, "I don't want this to happen again. I want to make this happen. And I've got full mandate to try to get this done." And, so we started going through a process of where he thought this should be. And I said, "No, that's not going to work." And we very quickly, in less than 3 months, cut a deal. From September to today, December 17th is when we cut a deal. But what was really kind of amazing about it is at the time of the acquisition, our revenues run rate was about 125 million. We had an install base of 175 systems, and we had performed about 33,000 procedures. We had introduced our hip, and we were working on our total knee. So we were really I had about 450 employees, about 100 people in R&D, and we were still losing money. It wasn't easy, because trying to convert people to partial knees was really part of our mantra. It's like, and we weren't ready with a total knee. So when Kevin, and our stock was at that point was not trading well, and we were probably going to have a pretty tough round in the next quarter in terms of our stock price, kind of lows of 6 and things like that. And, we eventually sold it at $30. And yeah, it was a 17x multiple off of revenue. And at the time, it was unheard of. It was absolutely, we were at one point the most shorted stock in Wall Street. And it was like the shorts were all over this. And all of a sudden we kept it pretty stealth, and Kevin got a lot of he got a lot of crap for doing this. But he said, he said something to me that I'll always remember. He said, "Look, I can lose my job, but I'm not gonna lose the company. The company's not gonna go down on this, but I can lose my job." And for 2 or 3 years, they were tough years because they didn't have it right. They were still going after the. So I give him a lot of credit. And now, it's like right now, Lindsey Vaughn just announced after getting her Makoplasty, that she's going to go back into the Olympics. I mean, what better promotion? Zimmer's trying to promote Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd rather have Lindsey Vonn 100% with a partial knee Makoplasty in, telling the story about robotic surgery than pumping with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I want to go back. So there's one thing that when I was reading about it, and this is something for all robotic systems, but especially I think it was even harder for you guys because technically when you guys were, you had Intuitive, which was in the soft tissue space, which was still, going through its ups and downs, right? Intuitive really didn't start really taking off until like later in the 2000s. For you guys though, in your early, at least in your 10Ks and your some of your early public filings, there was conversation about the difficulty in building a hospital sales pipeline and then driving surgeon adoption. I have another photo to share with the audience here. I think this was one of the very first cases, but talk to us about what was it like, for you guys to find the right clinical adopters, because finding not only the early adopters, it's really the innovators. Like this is back pre-social media, pre-anything, so it was even harder. How did you guys go about doing that and driving adoption and changing behavior?
It was, well, look, I always say to everybody out there that's really developing something, the most important thing you have to do is like work with a very tight group of people that really can help you. And if they're in close proximity, like what Dr. Roche was so close to us that, he came on, he was all in, then we started working with some of the other, thought leaders that were, high volume surgeons that kind of bought into this early on. And I would spend a lot of time. We would do a lot of labs. We'd go around the country, and we were focused only in the U.S. and we were trying to just build this out. So I think we were able to find a good group of like early users that were kind of like right behind Dr. Roche, and then that was really critical for us.
How did you find these people? Like conferences, through a network?
Exactly. It was really just going to conferences and talking to them and word of mouth. Eventually, so some of the like high volume surgeons, like on the West Coast, Dr. Kuhn was like the largest, highest volume guy that was out in St. Helena. And then in Texas, we started working with Stefan Kreutzer, and then at hospital special surgery, we started working with their team, and it became, and then we started working with some of the guys that were into partial, Andy Perlman and with working with Jess Launer. These were kind of like the early guys that were just like, and then we start getting publications in, and then we started talking about like, okay. And the cool thing was really, I think the haptics were just like such a cool concept of being able to create these borders. And then also we started getting into cutting instruments. And then I met, then the big one for me is meeting Dr. Dorr. Larry Dorr was a giant in the field, and he pushed us into the hip space. We got into
people, there's for every company, there's always that one, like, I feel like it's like in chemistry, you always have a catalyst that accelerates, right? A chemical reaction. For Intuitive, like one of those catalysts, I think, maybe I'm wrong, was Dr. Vip Patel, right? For Mako, who was that catalyst?
Martin Roche. Hands down.
Martin Roche. Okay. Why?
Because Martin was so passionate about this, and he was technically astute. And, he was in close proximity to us, and he just, and he had massive volume, and we were able to iterate really quickly. And he understood he understands how engineers think. So he was like, to me, he was, I remember, the first procedure was actually going to take place in Pennsylvania. And, when we originally worked on this, and I I upset a few of the doctors when I pivoted and I said, no, we're going to do it with Dr. Roche. And I think it was the best decision. Sometimes it's it's like 2 or 3 of these type of decisions that make the company. That was one of them. I think finding, it's just the chemistry of things, of how things kind of come together, right? Is really critical in these things.
What were some of the other inflection points for the company?
Oh,
If you were to look at like on YouTube TV, if you watch a football game, the data pulls it so that there's like 3 or 4 key moments of the entire game that you can just watch those key moments and you know exactly why the game outcome was what it was.
for you guys, I give a lot of credit to Roni in being able to lock down the technology. And, I have, because it really is a game changer. When looking and working with MIT and Barrett and locking in the whole arm manipulator, number one, I would say that hands down. Number two, someone crazy like Chris Dewey that started a robotics fund that invested in Roni. I think that it's just like those things don't happen. That's not a normal thing, right? It's not normal. I think that was number two. Then to me, the whole thing about how we got out of the liabilities of ZCat to become Mako. That was, I think, another kind of seminal moment. Finding Rapisi and getting into knees and then making a decision of like, I want my own implant, I think was another big important decision. Bringing in the types of and then Martin Roche in terms of being the guy to develop it for us. And then I think, the Michael Stansky is important because he got us into the public arena, with Chris, but I think Michael in particular was really critical in helping us to get there. And then just, the build out of, then starting to bring more professionals into the company, learning fast, and the team, just the core team of my executive team was a brilliant executive team. I mentioned Fritz and Menasha, but there was throughout the process, there were, a lot of guys that, Steve Nunes, who'd worked with me at VTI, was really, really critical kind of in the early days of getting us up and running. Richard Le Parmentier, who was our engineer, who was really, Larry Gibbons, these were Duncan Moffat. These were guys that were just like bringing the right type of people to kind of bring it to scale. And just as engineers, I mean, the quality of the engineers, like Yossi Chang was incredible. Yossi was one of the smartest engineers that I'd ever met in my life. He understood robotics. And so, I think it's those combination of things that then all of a sudden you start having success. We hit that 30,000 procedures. And in a very short period of time, we grew it to $125 million. I mean, that was not small potatoes. And then all of a sudden, it's like, it's a different scale company. So, kind of going through that cycle and everything, it was pretty fast. It's like all of a sudden things started happening. And I think when you see people that kind of looked at this, and, I mentioned Ken Langone. Ken realized what Mako was going to become. He had the insight to say, that's why he said you sold too early, because this could have been a much bigger, outcome. It was a great outcome, and I wouldn't change it for anything, because it's very hard to sit down in a company and say, how can you turn down a 17x multiple? And at the time, it was the right thing. And, I think the Stryker leadership and what Stryker has done with it gets a lot of credit. They really scaled it in a way, and they outsmarted everybody. And the fact that there, million knees that are now have been done with Mako is a remarkable story.
And I think it's a great example, if I could just say this from my own personal opinion, of a great example of like where innovative technology is acquired by the right strategic, and then that strategic is able to scale it using its resources and market in a way that's very meaningful and impactful. Again, like, 40% of all knees, from what I found online, are essentially being done by the Mako robot. And of course, like, not only that, but you have Zimmer with its own knee robot. You have Think Surgical and others. And the reason why I mention this is because once you have one successful innovator, in this case Mako, other people are going to innovate around that. And so as a whole, like, patients end up benefiting. So the idea of getting like a robotic knee replacement is kind of a standard now, to be honest.
Yeah, and there wasn't a lot of data. It wasn't unlike, but like an Insight Tech, we're very data driven. There's a lot of clinical data goes for it. There was less, I think, with the Mako, and navigation. If I really think about like navigation really does a good job. It can align. You can do ligaments. You can do cuts. You don't really need a robot. But I think the marketing appeal of the robot had a lot to do with this. And it's like, I have to have a robot. And that was the lesson that Intuitive really came into the market. I give a lot of credit to Jerry McNamara and his early sales force that he developed. It was kind of like from U.S. surgical mindset of how, guerrilla warfare of like, prisoners. It's like, I'm putting hospital A against hospital B. Like, I have an Intuitive robot. I have a Da Vinci. You don't. I'm taking market share. We kind of follow the same model. It's like once we entered into markets, in regions, like, it's like every hospital was going to get a Mako robot. It was just a matter of time.
Yeah. And yeah, definitely, I'm fortunate to have, finally met and sort of befriended Jerry. And I think there's a lot, if you look at the coaching tree of so many influential execs in our industry, a lot of them, they essentially map back all the way to Jerry. I want to bring up sort of my last photo for you.
Oh,
yeah, and this one's, I think, of the ones that we were able to find that you shared, this is my favorite one. So you only told me this the event this photo was taken around, but I'm gonna give you my interpretation. You tell me how much of this I'm correct, and then I want you to kind of share. So in this photo, this is your photo the day that you signed the acquisition, and I'm, Maurice, I'm sorry, like, I'm gonna zoom in here so people can see. I mean, you look worn out. Like, you look like you'd been working for a long time, and you look exhausted. So tell me, what was going through your head that day? What were you feeling?
Listen, first zoom out for a second. I want to see if you can see this.
Okay, where am I looking?
Well, I guess you can't see it, but it was like 11 o'clock at night. Right? It was already dark. Hey, you see that picture all the way? See that picture there? Look at that picture all the way at the corner. So you can zoom into that. I'll just show you something great.
In the corner, top right.
That picture up there.
Which one?
The right there, right to the left. It's on the wall.
This one right here?
You can't really see that, but that's my great aunt with President Clinton getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Oh, wow.
So that was my inspiration. of an incredible woman that did incredible work. And that was late at night, and we had been going really hard. The team was working, and it was, okay, sign. You're the last person to sign this thing. And it was late in the evening. And yeah, it was an exhaustive day. It was an incredible ride. I obviously, at the end of the day, what I'm most proud of is that, it was a great team of people. It was not just, one person, and it really is really unbelievable that it changed. I changed the lives of many, many people and their families at the company level. And also, and the impacts that it's had is like, the number of companies that have spun out of Mako, the people that have gone on in their professional careers to make something good of their lives, the financial incentives that people have gotten, the millionaires that came out, all the families that made money, that had, impact in their lives. And then, obviously, the success of knowing that I go back to the medical school days and Dr. McNary telling me that, son, medical school is a vocation and you gave up someone's spot. And I say, to me, it's like, well, I think I did something good here. I had a lot of impact on a lot of people's lives. And I might not have done it the way that, doctors do it in a day-to-day. And I give a lot of credit to every doctor that's in there. It's a hard work. My daughter's a doctor and I see her struggling and it's hard. It's hard. So it's just a different way of having an impact on people's lives.
I think you can argue, I remember the day that I left medical school, one of my professors, and, I was talking to him and it was very surreal because I had, maybe you had the same feeling where he had essentially built this identity around a doctor. Like as a medical student, when you tell people, oh, I'm a medical student, you have this unearned respect from the community, from everything, and you're leaving that. So you almost like you're erasing your identity. You don't know who you are anymore. And this one professor told me, he's like, maybe you're not going to be a doctor. He's like, but if you go into industry, arguably you'll have a much greater impact than a doctor. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, if you help with commercializing a product or coming up with a product that's going to impact thousands and maybe millions of lives, that's something that myself or any single doctor can't do, but somebody in industry can. That always inspired me. And so I would say that technically through your sacrifice of not becoming a doctor, you were able to find a path to impact thousands and millions of lives, Yeah. So
I think that's right. And you know what? And I think it's like, when you do things like that, I think that's I think that gives purpose. I think it gives examples of, and look, nothing's easy in life. And everyone kind of looks at things and they say, oh my God, you did this, you did that. Hey man, it wasn't easy. There were a lot of tough moments of things weren't going the right way. And, it all looks pretty at the end, but it's like, the sausage making is real, and you got to really understand that. People should appreciate that. It's like, no, it's not a bed of roses. It's not cut out for everybody. You have to have a certain mindset to do this type of stuff. You got to wake up and realize that not every day is going to be good, and you got to have the Chris Dewey special karma of always wanting to do be with people that are optimistic, people that are positive, that people that are looking at things the bright way. Because we always underestimate, we're always, Demi downers, and you can't be that way in this business.
Can't be that way in startup. It just doesn't work. I'm wondering, you kind of set it up for me. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is that during your time at Mako, this is the first time you're the CEO of a company, and at the same time, first time of a publicly traded CEO, so, a publicly traded company. So you went through a lot, and I'm wondering whether it's through mentors or colleagues or family members, what was something that was difficult or painful that somebody told you that forced you to change for the better? Can you go back in time, and does anything like that stand out to you?
Oh boy. I think that you're always trying to, even today, I think, I always try to, understand, where, when someone gives you advice, it happens. First of all, look, I think the answer to that is, being a public company, for example, and meeting those quarterly earnings calls, sometimes I would go in and make these try to explain things to people. And, I wasn't the best at it. So I had to learn how to articulate. So there's one example. I think, coming up, making decisions faster was something hard, because you always try to give people the benefit to do things, and sometimes you don't pull the trigger fast enough, and you got to be shrewd. Sometimes it's like, it goes against every bone in your body. It's like, hey, you're a great person, but you're not the right person to lead this right now. And it's someone you've built relationship with for many years. So making those tough decisions, at the end, I think being a CEO of a company that's fast growing is a lonely job. You can't, you have your friendships, your common, but at the end of the day, you're the guy, you're the boss. And, you got to be able to drive those type of things. Those were tough lessons. It's like, I like being a nice guy, but sometimes you can't be a nice guy in the job that you're doing. Those are tough. Those are the type of things that it takes time and experience to kind of learn that. I learned that the hard way.
When you think about your time at Mako, I don't like, I always believe that things happen for a reason. And so I never like to think about regrets or anything, but is there something that you can look back in your Mako days where you learned a lesson and you told yourself, okay, I'm not going to make that mistake again. And it sort of influenced you not only as a leader, but also as an entrepreneur that you took on to other companies?
Yeah. I think making decisions on when to let people go, I think was probably an important one. I also kind of learned one of the things that is I kind of talk about it, but we started doing it at Mako, and I'm doing it here in ZCat, which is D over E greater than 1, delivery over expectation greater than 1. And I think it's really important, and there's a balance there. It's like you want to push people with numbers and stuff like that, and you got to own up to them. But you got to, there comes to the point where, especially when you become a public company, that you have to learn how to become predictable. And Mako was the most unpredictable ride from day one. The fact that we had zero revenue, we were building this as we were going, right? In today's world, I just don't think that's the right. It's hard to work. And the balance of being a public company too early, kind of all of a sudden you start thinking of things on a quarterly basis instead of looking at things long term. So that lesson of, how to set expectations right, to balance it is really critical. How to work with engineering teams and keep them motivated when the company becomes a commercial company, and saying, hey, it's like R&D is really important, but, it's like we are not a science project anymore. We have to go out there and deliver. Those are hard lessons, and changing cultures, of how things are going, whether it was like kind of the ZCat days and saying, okay, we're thinking about this differently. This is a new entity. We're thinking about this differently, maybe singularly focused on this, exceed our expectations on delivering these type of things. So getting those things right and listening to people, it's like, but getting the input and then realizing that, okay, I got the input, done with the input, decision time, go, and moving on. You could stay static too long by not making decisions. So you got always ongoing and mentoring people. I think it's really important to give people. I had a quote always in my office that was Reagan's quote, which basically says it's incredible how much you can get done when you give other people credit, and not take the credit for yourself. Basically, that was the concept, and I so believe in that. It's like forget about the ego and just like move on and like let's get it done. It's a we mentality. It's how we build culture, how we build teams, how we progress this for the better of everybody, and good things will happen.
Yeah, and I definitely can see that sort of translate to what you're doing now at ZCat, just on the caliber of people that you've recruited there. Maybe I just sort of, as we round this interview out, and I appreciate you coming on and sort of celebrating, the anniversary today, with me and doing this episode, which has been fun. But tell us a little bit about ZCat and what you guys are doing, because again, like it's one of the few companies in my mind that it's literally like watching.
First of all, I need to spend more time, not on this one, but I'd love to come.
Oh no, we already agree with that. You're coming back on the show for that. We'll tease the audience a little bit about it.
I'll do that. But I look, I really, of everything that I've done, I start off with my when I started my career as a medical student, and then I got into computers and computations of mapping out the brain. And then I got into this whole idea of tracking instruments in the brain. And then precision became important. So robotics kind of like linked it. And then this last concept of an electronic scalpel, incisionless surgery, the ability to use ultrasound beams that converge into a target, and then all of a sudden that the way the frequency works, it all comes together to do something to the tissue. We're learning right now so much about what energy in a targeted way, therapeutic ultrasound can do to tissue. And we've learned, the first things that we've learned is that we can use it to do ablation or lesioning. And we're deep into treating movement disorders, so essential tremor, Parkinson's. And, we're in the first or second inning, but this is a multi-billion-dollar business opportunity with now we have over 200 centers. We've exceeded the revenues of Mako, and we're growing at a 40+% on those markets. And there's so much more to do. We have a global footprint in those areas. But what's also as exciting is it's a platform. So this technology that works inside the MRI, you're getting direct visualization, you're getting closed loop capabilities. You can confirm where you're targeting through thermometry and through other mechanisms, acoustic sounds going through the skull, and you can actually see an effect before you actually do the final effect. You can do modulate. We modulate. So we actually can, when we target the VIM, the thalamus, to treat patients with essential tremor, we know exactly where the nuclei is. We can bring the temperature up to 40 degrees. We can see there's a reaction. We can see the patient has a reaction because the patient's awake. It's a 1-hour procedure. And all of a sudden, and then when we get the confirmation with 2 or 3 targeted lesions, sub-millimeter precision, we can get a full effect that it changes their lives. Patients that have tremors for many years, all of a sudden it changes their life. It's an instantaneous gratification. It's amazing. But now we're also finding that we can do things like opening up the blood-brain barrier that allows us to allow drugs to come in, and gene therapy to come in, and start looking at how to really truly cure diseases in the brain with targeted therapy, which is exciting. And we're starting to work with some really great partners to figure that out. There's a lot of work to be done there, but it's really exciting how that's coming together. And then we also, we had a piece that came out in 60 minutes on how we're treating Alzheimer's and how we're treating addiction. And, with addiction, 100,000 people die every year in this country with opiate addictions. It's 25 million people. It's the impact to our society is devastating. And there's a lot of things that aren't working. We're early in our trials at West Virginia. We're about to expand it to other centers, to Maryland and to New York and to here in South Florida at Broward. And we're excited about it. It's like we think that so we have a really good business that's like day-to-day operating movement disorders, building up a community, and we're building a whole new capability on a platform to be able to do it. And, we have 400 employees, and we have a great team of people, the most talented team I've ever worked with that is really, really capable. A great board, great investors that are kind of in it, and people that really think of it as, this is a long haul. But in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to hear a lot about Inside Tech because it's a really, really transformative platform.
Well, we're getting you back on the show just to talk purely about Inside Tech because there's definitely a lot to cover. But for the audience, I know the audience got exposure to Inside Tech because we had JJ on the show earlier this year. But again, it's literally like magic, and one of the greatest things I love. The patient videos were essentially, somebody has a very severe tremor. They can barely function in normal life. They get the procedure and literally like magic, they're almost back to normal and they're living a better life. So we're really excited for you and the team over there. And Maurice, again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
Happy anniversary on Mako. And looking forward to having you back on just to talk about Inside Tech. And yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun on that one. So
You bet.
awesome. Well, for the audience who's listening, be sure to subscribe to the show. Give us 5 stars, write a review. We're number 1 for a reason. I'm your host, Omar Khateeb, and we'll see you all next time.